History and Culture podcasts are a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit pcntv.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to PCN's History and Culture podcast. I'm Phil Beckman. This podcast series features interviews exploring Pennsylvania's rich history from the colonial era to industrialization, the Gettysburg Campaign to sports history, and from art to politics and more.
We're with Dotty Brown, the author of Boathouse Row, Waves of Change in the Birthplace of American Rowing. Welcome to our program, Dotty.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me.
Often people see Boathouse Row in Philadelphia for the first time from across the Schuylkill River. What kind of a first impression does it make?
Well, it's a number of very old buildings. They're from the mid-19th century, and they're very eclectic. So it's a beautiful architectural scene as people drive along the river or even take the train to New York. A lot of people wonder as they take the train to New York because now the lights are on the houses, and so it's quite a spectacular sight.
Now, Dotty, you said in a past interview that Boathouse Row is not a distant, unreachable place. Why might passersby get the impression that it is?
Well, for its history, it has been a club-only venue, so you have to belong to a club to be part of it. So it has had a kind of elitist image to it, although many of the people who row in the past and now are working class, people who are blue collar, and of course some of them are, do have a little bit of money, but it doesn't cost much more or costs about the same actually as being a member of a gym. So it's pretty easy to join if you take lessons. It is the kind of sport where you do need to take lessons because the boats are skinny, the oars are very long, and if you tip your oar one way or the other too high, you may flip your boat, which I have learned and I have done. So it is possible to join, and even though it may seem like this is a iconic, untouchable sort of a place, I joined it. A lot of people can join it. They just have to take the lessons.
How many buildings make up Boathouse Row, and were they all built at about the same time?
Well, the first house was built in 1861. What is now Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club, although there were no women on the river at the time. There are 11 buildings on the row, and there are 11 clubs.
So generally speaking, for someone who's never been in a boathouse, what does the inside of any of these boathouses look like? Can you tell us?
Sure. Well, you walk in, and there's generally a very large, well, on the ground floor, there's a very large boat bay with many, many long boats in them, ranging inside from singles, doubles, quads, which are for 4 people, and eights, which are the big long ones that you see, in the Olympics. So that would be on the ground floor. You'd have your boat bay. Then upstairs, you usually have a very large space where it could either be a social space or they put out ergs, which are rowing machines, and the members come out and, especially in bad weather, they'll come out and practice rowing on the rowing machines, or they sometimes do it just for exercise. Then, maybe surrounding that space, there will be trophy cases with many, many trophies in them. All the houses do have winners going back 150 years. And so there are these beautiful silver ornaments, bowls and cups, and then there are photographs. So there's a lot of that kind of treasure around. So that's basically what's in the boathouses.
Dotty, you said that the history of Boathouse Row goes back to the mid-19th century. Who got the Boathouse Row project going back then?
Well, it wasn't called Boathouse Row originally. So in 1821, the dam was built on the Schuylkill River. It was actually the second most visited place in the United States after Niagara Falls because it was the longest dam in the country. And that dam blocked the water, and that's when it became smooth behind the dam. And as a result, rowing started. So it really started in the 1820s. But it wasn't until Fairmount Park started developing in the late 1850s that it ordered the clubs to take down what were essentially garages. They were just spaces for the boats made either of wood or brick, and they were very unsightly. And this developing new park said, we need something that is picturesque, made of stone. So they ordered all the garages to be taken down. And between 1860 and 1904, which is the last year that a house was built, that's when the houses came up, and that's when eventually Boathouse Row got the name that it has today.
Dottie, the title of your book includes The Birthplace of American Rowing. How did Boathouse Row earn that distinction?
Well, New York did have rowing about the same time as Philadelphia in New York Harbor. But there were so many clubs here, and we also became a very competitive kind of a place. So the clubs here were winning Olympics. In 1900, Vesper Boat Club won the Olympics in the 8, and they also won in 1904. Those were really the earliest of the modern day Olympics. There was one in 1896, but they didn't have rowing at that one because the weather was bad, and that was canceled. So we became very competitive, and many clubs were here. I suppose other cities might argue, for instance, Boston or New York, that they might have been first, but really we nurtured rowing. We nurtured women's rowing, for instance. The first competitive women's rowing club in the United States was the Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club on Boathouse Row, and because of them, in large part, they pushed for more women to get into rowing around the country, and eventually, it took a lot of years, but by 1976, finally, women rowing became an Olympic sport.
Now, again, go ahead,
yeah.
Dottie, sorry.
No, I just make that argument. I mean, there's no hard proof that we are the cradle of American rowing, but I would argue that we are.
Well, Dottie, let's consider the overall popularity of the sport, especially going back, all the way back to the mid-19th century. Just how big a deal was rowing at the time?
So rowing was the most popular spectator sport in the United States. You have to remember that baseball was only getting going in the mid-1800s. Basketball wasn't even invented until the 1890s. So people didn't have television, anything like that, and they would come out to the river and watch the sport, on top of which there was gambling. And of course, Americans love to gamble. So huge stakes were in play. You could make as much as $10,000 winning a race in today's money. So between the gambling and the fact that there wasn't much else to do outside, it was the most popular spectator sport.
And as you mentioned, there were clubs back in those days, lots of clubs, and we're going to talk about them in a minute. But first, I want to talk about your experience, Dottie. I understand you're a rower yourself, so explain the sport and how a team works together, a typical rowing course. Try to tell us.
Well, a cruise shell goes by obviously you use oars, but you also use your legs and your back because your feet are attached to a board and you're sitting on a seat that slides back and forth. So you push off at the same time that you put your oars in the water, and between the power of your legs and the power of your back and the power of your arms, that's how you propel yourself. So as I said earlier, there are boats that are twos, fours, and eights, and some of the sculling is two oars, and sweep rowing is one oar. So in the eight-oared boat, for instance, you'd have four people on one side with oars and four people on the other side with, each with a single oar. And so that is how those kinds of boats propel. So in terms of teamwork, well, you have to work and row at exactly the same time with exactly the same kind of power. And it takes a lot of teamwork to be able to do that. The bigger boats, the eights have a coxswain, and the coxswain will yell commands to go faster. The stroke rate is, for instance, 40 strokes a minute would be a very fast kind of a rate, if you can imagine rowing that quickly. And so the stroke rate and the power, and also you might have curves in the river. So that is another issue in terms of the kind of teamwork you need. We have bridges on the Schuylkill. You have to go through those without crashing into them. So it does take a lot of teamwork.
Now, again, going back to the 19th century, let's consider who were the men who rowed. And I know it was primarily men anyway, and you had to have enough money to buy a boat, of course.
So if you can imagine what the economy was like in the 1840s, 1850s, it was most likely that you had men of means, and they tended to be white men of means, who had some leisure time to be able to row in the morning or row in the evenings. So they were largely the ones who were rowing. As immigrants poured into the country towards the latter part of the 19th century, you would have Irishmen and Germans coming in who were more laborers, people like the famous John B. Kelly Sr., the father of Grace Kelly, and another competitive rower, John B. Kelly Jr., his son. John B. Kelly Sr. won 2 gold medals, one right after the other, within a half an hour of one in a single, one in a double in the 1920 Olympics, and he won gold again in 1924. And he was really the most famous rower, not only in the United States, but in the world. So later you had women coming in, and they had to fight a battle to get into rowing. And today you have more inner city kids coming on to the river. So the demographics of rowing have really kind of mirrored what has happened in this country.
Dotty, let's talk about the formation of clubs in the early days, and how did these clubs separate themselves by establishing identities?
So curiously, 2 of the clubs on Boathouse Row started out as firehouses. And for those who know Philadelphia, firehouses were community groups that would put out fires in their neighborhood. But they also had a lot of unusual traditions. Of course, they had uniforms. They gave each other single-syllable nicknames that reflected their personalities. For instance, there was a Burpee whose nickname was Seed, and Lippincott, whose nickname was Type. So they brought those traditions to Boathouse Row. Burpee and Lippincott were rowers. They were not firemen, but by the time they came to the row, they kept those same traditions. So some of the clubs started that way. 2 of the clubs are related to the University of Pennsylvania. One was made up of alumni who, that's the University Barge Club was one of the earliest ones. And they were, again, alumni of the University of Pennsylvania. And then you later on had the university itself, undergraduates, form a rowing club, which is the College Boat Club on Boathouse Row. There was a club called Fairmount, which was made up of men from the Fairmount neighborhood, and they were pretty blue collar, tile setters and electricians, people like that. So they each do have different personalities. One of the clubs on Boathouse Row today remains all male. That's the Malta Boat Club. The others have become co-ed since the 1970s. And you have one club that is all women, which is the Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club. So they do have different personalities.
Now, as we consider what rowing was like in the 1800s, and our use of the word club certainly suggests some exclusivity to it. So who was eligible to join any of these clubs back then?
Back in the 19th century?
Yes.
Or when? I think anybody who basically wanted to join, you always had to have a sponsor, and you still do today. You need to have somebody who recommends you for the club. And then you have to pay dues. And you have to be able to row. So I think those are the three major elements, but I don't think it was ever that difficult to get into a club if you had the money for dues and knew how to row and knew somebody.
Dotty, I thought that marital status entered into it at some point.
Well, there's one club that was started called the Bachelor's Barge Club, and you did have to be a bachelor to join that. And frankly, through the 19th century and until the 1970s, with the exception of the Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club, you had to be a man. They did not want women. Rowing was considered a manly sport. That was the phrase that was always used during the 19th and early 20th century. It's a tough sport. You when you really are racing, you get your body into what they call an anaerobic state. Your oxygen is depleted and your muscles are screaming for air, and it's a tough sport. So, yeah, men.
Now, Dotty, as you were researching your book, what kind of interesting or quirky things did you come across as far as customs or traditions are concerned? Some of the more unusual stuff.
Well, I did mention uniforms. So in the early years, they changed their uniforms constantly. I got this information from the minute books of the clubs, where they would have to talk about what the club expenses were and procedures and things like that. So they had summer uniforms and winter uniforms and dress uniforms. And one of the funny things was one summer it was really hot and the men were rowing topless, and that was a big scandal in the 19th century. So that's when they finally got lightweight uniforms. Let me think what else is quirky. There are several clubs that formed upriver clubs where they could row up the Schuylkill River, get off around East Falls, and go to their clubhouse. And two of those clubs still remain today. And those are places where they would row their lady friends up in what were called ladies' boats. And when they got up there, they'd have dinners. And today, two of the clubs, as I said, have their clubhouses up there, and they do have social events there still. The minute books also talked about the amount of whiskey and cigars that the men used to buy and use. And then they had, in the old days, many, many rules. One of them, of course, was not to bring women into the club, and there were some scandals around that. They also used to post the names of deadbeats, the guys who didn't pay their dues, on the doors of the clubs, hoping that that would embarrass them into paying. And according to the minute book, sometimes they did, and sometimes they were thrown out because they didn't.
Did any rower who rowed past Boathouse Row go on to any kind of glory in the future with respect to the sport? Maybe the Olympics?
Oh, we've had many Olympians from Boathouse Row. In fact, there's a plan to put up the names of the many, many people who have won Olympics, Pan American Games, big international meets. And that, I guess you wouldn't call it a piece of sculpture, is going to go somewhere near the reviewing stands. But among the famous people, of course, is John B. Kelly Sr. There was a crew in the early 1930s that was called the Big Eight that had a world record in rowing that they won, and that stood for about almost 100 years. Women's rower, the first 1976 women's Olympic crew, most of those members came from Philadelphia. So we are very, very important when it comes to training Olympians in the past and also for the future.
So, Dotty, the Boathouse Row has been there for 150 years or so. So it makes me think about its purpose today. Are the boathouses still being used for their original purpose today? If not, how has it changed?
Well, it hasn't changed that much. There have been, I guess, questions about whether the club should be allowed to stay there, but there is an agreement with the city that goes back to the mid-1800s that the land on which the club sits belongs to the city of Philadelphia, but the buildings belong to the clubs. And they spend a lot of money maintaining them. They're by the river, which crests very often, the water gets quite high and the boat bays get flooded, and they've had a lot of repair work to do over the years. But essentially, they are places where that attract people who want to compete, people who want to be outdoors rowing, and people who want a little bit of a social context, which you have in these clubs.
You said that the water gets high in the Schuylkill River. What other challenges are there to being on the Schuylkill River?
Well, that's the biggest one. There is wind. There is, when the water gets high, it also gets very, very fast. And so we are constantly getting warnings now by email, that the water is too fast to go out safely. There are the bridges. There are rocks up by East Falls. We just call these falls because there used to be waterfalls there until the Schuylkill got flattened by the dam. So you can't row past the rocks in the boats that are owned by the clubs. If you have your own kayak, you might be able to maneuver around those rocks. So that's a challenge. The bridges are pretty much big challenges. And there's also a one-way direction. So you have to go up the river on one side and come back down the other side. And there's a chance that you might crash into somebody else because you row backwards. You're not, unless you have eyes behind your head, you have to be constantly turning around and making sure there's nobody behind you especially when you're going through the bridges.
Now, I understand the Schuylkill River has to be dredged regularly, and when it is, does that present any obstacle or inconvenience to rowing?
Well, the dredging is really, let's say it's more of an every 20-year effort, and it used to be funded to a great extent by the Army Corps of Engineers. But recently, the latest dredge was quite an ordeal. It's not that it blocks the boats from rowing. It gets really shallow near the dam. It makes it very hard for some of the clubs to exit from their docks because the water is so shallow. And also, when the silt collects up on the areas where the races take place, apparently if you have more water under your boat goes faster than a lane that would have less water under it because there's more silt on the ground. So those are major issues. And a dredge is very complicated. The first group that was hired in the last dredge to clean up the river quit because they found so many old tires and a couple cars at the bottom of the river, and they said they couldn't deal with it. So hopefully we won't have to dredge again for a while. I think the dredge, frankly, is more of a challenge than rowing over a river needing dredge.
Dotty, we have about 2 minutes left. When Boathouse Row is lit up at night, it's a beautiful sight. When did that idea take shape anyway?
So there was a lighting architect named Ray Grinald, who in the late 1970s was traveling around the world and felt that the image of Philadelphia was boring. People were taking pictures of Liberty Bell or Independence Hall, and he thought putting lights on Boathouse Row would liven up the city. And in fact, he was able to accomplish that. The lighting has changed over the years from the old incandescent lights to now the LED lights. But it is now really the most photographed place in Philadelphia.
Our last question, Dotty. How else would you like to see the sport of rowing and the history of rowing preserved?
So there is a group on the river that is now trying to encourage the clubs to archive and take care of their many, many trophies and banners because they're falling apart. These are rowing clubs, not historical clubs. So we're hoping they will put more of these artifacts into institutions like the Historical Society, where they can be preserved. Also, we're trying to establish a digital rowing museum for Boathouse Row, where all these artifacts could be photographed and displayed, and many of the stories around them, which are fabulous stories of individuals who are very special and events that took place, like the 1964 Olympics, which was won by the Vesper Boat Club, quite surprisingly. Those kinds of stories and images hopefully will be available to the public at some point, maybe in the not too distant future.
Our guest has been Dotty Brown, the author of Boathouse Row, Waves of Change in the Birthplace of American Rowing. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you.
Listeners like you make PCN programming possible. Full episodes of PCN's history and culture content, like the interview you just heard, are available to stream with the PCN Select app. Explore other documentary programs, event coverage, and a lot more. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.